This is episode 47 of This Makes Me Happy. Welcome to This Makes Me Happy, a podcast about people and what makes them happy. I'm your host, Bernardo Margulis. I'm a designer, art director, and educator, and I'm the principal of This Makes Me Happy, a design studio where I help my clients with branding and visual communications. I'm very happy to present This Makes Me Happy, the podcast, where each week I chat with a different person about what makes them happy. My guests come from all walks of life, and each of them shares their own personal happy stories. Join us every week for a unique conversation. Hello, I am very happy to have Nicole Antoinette with me. Nicole is the host of the Real Talk Radio podcast. Hi, Nicole. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm pumped. I'm excited to be here. I usually don't record this early in the morning, or I guess like early at the time of this recording. And so this is like how I'm starting my day. Like I'm into it. I'm ready. Let's do it.
And I don't know if I mentioned in the email, I didn't realize until last night that I knew you were in Oregon. I didn't realize until last night that you were 3 hours behind. I was like, oh, 8:30 in the morning. Coffee time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm not up before 8:30, but this is usually earlier, but we've been trying to make this happen for such a long time. So I was like, nope, let's do it. I will first thing Friday morning, make it happen.
And I'm so happy we were able to make it. Did you go on a run, or is this like the first thing?
I did not go on a run. I am getting over, you can probably hear it, I'm getting over being sick, and I don't run on Fridays. Friday is usually my off day. So yeah, I had plenty of time this morning and didn't really do, what did I do this morning? I'm currently working on developing a meditation habit, which is something that I have tried to do over and over again a million times. And I am committed to it sticking this time. So I'm using the Headspace app, which has been recommended to me and is incredible. It's so good. So I did my little meditation and had my smoothie, and now I'm drinking some tea and talking to you. So it's a good day.
Wonderful. And else from all this wonderful stuff that I introduced you with and that you just mentioned, is there anything else you want people to know about you?
Well, you mentioned the podcast. That's kind of my main creative project. You mentioned running. Yeah, I'm a runner. Let's see. I'm a total crazy cat person. Something people, I mean, anyone who follows me on Instagram probably knows that. I'm a pastry chef in training, about to start my second term of culinary school, which was kind of interesting, going back to school after, essentially 10 years after I graduated undergrad. So that has been a transition. And yeah, hosting the Real Talk Radio podcast. It's basically just a show that's filled with honest conversations about what I call the wonderful mess of being human. So the fact that I'm super passionate about having honest conversations and real talk and just real people talking about real things, not trying to do like life hacks or here's the 10 ways you need to fix yourself, right? Like none of that, just kind of sharing stories about how we all live life. I think, knowing that that's the creative project that I'm most passionate about probably says a lot about me, that I'm super into having open and honest conversations. I think that that's probably one of my biggest values, is just communication and getting to the heart of what's true for anyone without judgment.
And that's how I found out about you through being boss, and then I heard your podcast, and it's awesome. So everyone listen, Real Talk Radio. But let's get to it. Although we've already mentioned a few things, but what makes you happy? So
it's funny. You probably didn't realize that by posing this question that I was going to have this like deep, like existential thought about this. But because obviously, when we first emailed, that was months ago, right? So it's been kind of like in the back of my mind, because it's a seemingly really simple question, right? But just because something's simple doesn't mean that it's easy. So I've been reflecting a lot about this, and what's kind of come up for me is something that I've talked about in other places before, but is the difference between joy and fun. So I feel like fun is the kind of instant gratification-y, eat a piece of cake, go to a comedy show, right? Like hang out with friends, go to a party, like whatever it is that makes you really happy kind of in the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's lasting, but it's still important. Like a life without fun, I feel like would be sad, right? Like we wouldn't enjoy that. But like the other side of that is that the things that are really fun in the moment are fleeting. And if I've had periods of time where my life is just about that, like just chasing the good times and the things like what's going to be most fun right now, my life winds up feeling like it's not really very rooted, or it's kind of, there isn't like a larger purpose. So for me, There's, things that I could tell you that make me happy that are fun. Let's see, reading erotica. I read a lot of erotica. That's something that I find to be very fun. Doesn't necessarily have like deep meaning in my life other than that it's fun when it happens. Let's see, I mentioned being a crazy cat person, following this woman, Hannah Shaw. She is a kitten rescuer. She goes by the name Kitten Lady. Her Instagram is Kitten X Lady. And so she basically takes in these like teeny, like 1 day old, 3 day old, 1 week old orphan kittens and raises them up to adoptable age and adopts them out. And she's the best at social media that I've ever seen. Like the videos that she posts and just like these tiny I could spend all day, every day on her Instagram, and that makes me enormously happy. Right. So I think that kind of happiness is really important. Like it's nice to be able to have something that can just immediately put you in a good mood or make you smile or, with nothing deeper. But the other side of that equation, this idea of like joy versus fun, I find that the things that make me the most joyful or that bring the most lasting joy and fulfillment into my life are often not fun in the moment, or that aren't things that I would necessarily say make me happy while I'm doing them. Like running is such a good example. For the most part, running kind of sucks. Like it's once, maybe every 12 runs, you have what I call the magical unicorn run where everything feels amazing and it's just like so good. But that's rare. And it's rare that the run is awful, but mostly it just kind of is. Like it's kind of a slog. I'm always happy when it's done, right? Like I'm not like waking up in the morning like, yes, I'm so excited to go do this like hard thing. Like I'm tired. I want to stay in bed. Like I want to eat cookies. I want to lay on the couch. And so it's funny. Like I wouldn't say that running makes me happy while I'm doing it, but if I look at my life, the things that make me happy, I feel like it's like personal growth or systematically working towards like a seemingly impossible goal or like pushing myself to do hard things, right? Like that all kind of falls under the same bucket, right? Or the same topic. And that those things, like they make me happy. I think you get what I'm saying. Like they make me happy in a bigger, like deeper sense. Same thing with like, I think about writing, that I don't enjoy writing, I'm happy afterwards. Like I like having things written, and like I don't enjoy necessarily the act of running doesn't make me happy, but having running in my life makes me happy. So I don't know. It's kind of like two different ways that I look at happiness. The like, let's eat cake and like watch stand-up comedy. That sounds, like really fun. But then just kind of the process of like letting yourself change and doing hard things. Something that I'm really kind of obsessed with and have been for years is kind of the question around how we close the gap between what we say we want and what we actually do. Like there's something just like the process of change, right? Like someone says they want to be a runner, or they say they want to write a book, or they want to, any of these things. Why doesn't that happen? And kind of like exploring and playing in that space of kind of discipline and devotion and doing things when you're not in the mood to do them. Like that makes me really happy, even if it's not fun. So it's kind of a long answer, but that's what I've been thinking about.
So is that gap that you're mentioning, is that bridging the gap between fun and joy?
Yeah, sort of. Well, I think for me, a well-lived life involves both. Like I've had periods of time where I'm so dedicated to a hard goal that I haven't really allowed room for like play and fun and spontaneity. And after a while, that kind of wears you down, right? And I'm not happy that way. And like I said, I've had the opposite where it's all fun and no kind of pursuit towards something larger, something more meaningful, something hard. And that winds up feeling empty. So, for me, if I'm looking at what makes me happy, it's like overall a life that includes both of those things, right? And like, obviously I could give plenty of examples for both, but for me, it's less, when I think about what makes me happy, it's less like a specific thing or a specific person than it is like having both of those in my life at the same time, right? Like it's funny, like I kind of jokingly mentioned reading erotica, that's something that's fun, but I feel like reading in general kind of bridges both, because like one of the other things that makes me really happy is hearing about how other people do life. And that's kind of the whole basis behind my podcast, but it's the same way that I love reading memoirs. I love reading biographies. Like I'm so curious about why do people do what they do, or like what drives them, what motivates them. So while I find like the act of actually sitting there reading is fun, but it also like it's stuff that I'm always thinking about. I just finished the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, which was like incredible. It was one of the best books I've read in so long. And I didn't even think I was, a huge fan of his or anything like that. But so it was fun to read it. And like things that I learned from it are, they're like still in my head and they carry on. So I don't know. That's something else. That's something else that makes me happy.
Well, so do we exchange about that biography? Because I talked about it with someone recently. It was like when you read about Steve Jobs, how crazy, like to talk about like how other people do live, like his head, how he did live and how he visualized everything. It's like mind blowing.
Yeah, I find it's interesting because the people that I choose to have on the podcast for the most part, like I'm looking for like regular people, right? They don't have to have done some like crazy things. I think there's a lot of value in hearing how just like people like you and me and just regular people do life. But I also think there's a lot of value in hearing about how like the true outliers do life, right? Like I'm a really avid reader. And I read, what other good biographies? I read the Ashley Vance biography of Elon Musk this year, which again, talk about like these people who are operating at like what I would think of as like basically a superhuman level. I feel the same way when I read like memoirs or biographies of like top elite, really successful athletes that they have something like they're obviously executing on a level that other people don't. And so I find that it's helpful to have both, like just to have the conversation with like the person who lives down the street about, like what we're doing about social media addiction, right? Versus, listening to someone who's at like the complete top of their game or, reading about Michael Phelps or whatever. So.
Oh, and it's interesting that's, since you mentioned your podcast, you talk from everyone from an elite runner to just everyday people that just have a story to tell. So it definitely comes through. Going back to the idea of joy versus fun, how did you come up with the difference and why?
You mean, how did that kind of first come into my mind?
Yeah.
That's a good question. This kind of, we pull this thread back, it's probably 5 or 6 years. May 1st, 2011, I quit drinking and started running on the same day. I had never been even remotely athletic. People say that, but then you look back and they played like little peewee, whatever sports as a kid. Like literally, I never did anything athletic ever. Like I was an indoor kid. Like I cared about school and reading and like eating candy and sitting in the corner and like not like I was not an athlete ever, ever, ever. And for me, running was really the way out of the drinking hole. It was kind of like taking one maybe addiction or obsession and like transferring it over to something else. Like sometimes that's what you need to make a change in your life, is to go from one thing to something totally different, right? And for me, running was the first thing that I ever started, found out that I was terrible at and didn't quit. And that really changed my entire life. I had a real kind of history of flakiness and of not doing things that I wasn't good at right away. I don't think I'm unique, and people like things that they're good at, right? Like no one likes to feel kind of frustrated and insecure and out of their element. And, it's like the first day at school or the first day at a new job. Like it's awful, right? Like it feels terrible. Like we like the feeling of, mastery or leadership or, that type of stuff. But so for me, I feel like every lesson that I've learned about life has like somehow come from running. It's like I could track everything back to running. And, so going through that process was the first time that I had to kind of confront, like, I'm really enjoying doing this. This is bringing so much to my life, but actually it's the worst and I hate it. So like, what is that about? And so it was the first time that I was really kind of digging into how is it possible that this thing that's so hard and unenjoyable. And especially I literally couldn't run for 2 minutes when I first started. Like I put on my kind of old shoes that, I had probably gotten at some kind of sale at Macy's years before, like from the back of the closet. And I said, okay, I'm going to run around the block. Like that was my first thing. I ran about a minute, I think in 45 seconds, I thought I was going to die. Like it was just like, that was it. I was going to die. And to go from there and sticking with it, that kind of every day of like, I was dreading it and it was so hard and I didn't want to do it, but I didn't want to quit. And it was like, I had never felt that kind of dichotomy before of like, in the moment, my feelings are, this is the worst, I don't want to do it. But I understood that like, that was just the surface level. And the deeper level was like, no, I do want to do this. Like, I'm committed to this. Like, I want to see what's possible. And that's kind of really what brought that to the forefront for me, of realizing like, oh, there actually is this deeper level of enjoyment that can come from pushing yourself to do something that either you didn't think that you could do, or that was hard, especially for me, having come off of a life as such like a public party girl, right? And like when your life revolves around kind of drinking and fun times, like it's all that kind of instant gratification-y fun, right? Like just chasing the next good time, the next story, the next party, the next that type of thing is all that. There's like nothing deeper going on there. And so this was kind of my first experience with having to work really hard for something. And I found that I really loved that. And it's funny how something that you never used to value, I was 26 when I quit drinking and started running. So, for 26 years, I had never really valued hard work. I had never valued putting effort into something. I had never valued, just pushing myself and like true personal growth. And so that kind of unlocked this realization for me that, joy and fun aren't like what makes me most joyful isn't necessarily what's going to be fun in the moment. And that's something that I definitely need in my life. Like my life has been a lot deeper and richer and more satisfying since making that realization.
Well, it sounds it's the idea, as you said before, you need the balance of fun and joy. And back then you were just fun. And you needed that balance for happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like I said, I tend to be like a pendulum person. Like I go from like being so far on one side to then being so far on the other side in order to like settle somewhere in the middle. And part of this kind of transition process for me, I went way too far to the other side, like so disciplined, so serious, like going to do hard things, going to change my life, until like that also is not sustainable, because if you're not like you're not laughing, you're not having fun, right? Like that you wind up being unhappy with that as well. So and I think, I don't know, I have like an interesting relationship with the word balance, but I think that balance doesn't mean like you do a little bit of it. For me, it doesn't mean you do a little bit of everything every single day, or it's kind of like just like oscillating obsessions or oscillating periods of like what's most important, like that they're, when you're trying to make a change, let's say, or start a business or start a podcast, like there's going to be kind of a disproportionate amount of energy that goes into that because it's just getting off the ground. So maybe that means less time and energy goes to your family or to a hobby or to something else. Okay, that's fine. Eventually it kind of comes back that if I look at my life over the course of a quarter or a year or a couple years, as long as I'm like hitting all the things that are important to me, right? Like it's not like I have to do something that brings me, deep joy, and I have to have something that's fun, like 2 times a day each every single day. Like that's not really the way I think of it. It's more kind of like overall, if I'm looking at, a 2-week period where I haven't like seen any of my friends or done anything fun. All right, like time to make some changes, so it's more of like a bigger picture thing.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about not trying to get everything in all the time. Like the myth of balance being you can achieve anything all the time, 24/7. And, I think there's a big, especially, I think it happens more with female entrepreneur world, where children and family and husband and wife and life and this and that and then a career, and there's more of that myth debunking itself that, all right, you have to prioritize. It's okay to be 80% here, but then come back to it later, or give 110 here, but then that later you have to come down and not be yourself for not having everything all the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I am definitely an obsessive like personality type, meaning like I'm either totally obsessed with something or like I couldn't care less. Like there really is not a lot of middle ground for me. And it took a long time to accept that about myself. But I realized that I think the only way that we make big leaps of progress on something is to let it be an obsession, at least for a short period of time, right? Like if you're trying to learn a language or trying to do it, like you have to be somewhat, I think, or at least this has been my experience, like kind of give yourself over to the obsession of if all you want to read about is this one topic, okay, that's fine. Like you don't have to, you know what I mean? Like letting yourself be really excited about what you're excited about and knowing that, again, yeah, like getting something big off the ground, like that's going to be your obsession. That's going to take more focus and energy and, but it won't always be that way. So I think that kind of, for me, I've seen success come from this like oscillating obsessions. Like I'm usually pretty clear at any given time what it is that I'm obsessed with. Like when I went back to school, that was a huge change for me. And after having essentially worked at home alone for years and years and years, right? So the first time I actually had to be somewhere at a certain time, right? That I was like responsible to like the chefs in the program and the other people in school. And like, I knew that the only way that I was going to be able to be successful with that is if everything else went on the back burner. I mean, that was the first time that you and I tried to talk and I was like, nope, can't take it. Like basically hard rule, have to say no to everything else right now, because I knew the only way that I was going to be able to make that transition was if school was the obsession and everything else got significantly downgraded, right? And that meant less time running. That meant, obviously I still cared about the podcast, but being very clear of like, these are the only times that I'm available to record, right? And like letting that be an obsession. And while I'm excited for the second term and I care about it, I've settled in now. Like I have the routine. Like I don't need to dedicate like that much kind of intense energy once it goes into more of like a maintenance mode situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this makes me think a little bit about how going to your podcast and how you like real conversations. Just it feels like there are a lot of parallels, and I don't know if this is conscious or not, with who you talk to and what you talk about and what you're saying about your life. Like you said, obsessed. You have to obsess over something, and I love how you always ask your guests, "What are you totally obsessed with right now?" Or thinking about your guests, how you're talking about going back to school and veering, and all right, this is what I'm going to do now. And I'm thinking of Vasavi Kumar, how she was talking about how she was driving to class, and then, nope, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to switch things over, I'm going to do this is what I need to do right now. Do you find those parallels, or those on purpose, or is that something that just happens because you live your life a certain way?
You mean in terms of how I choose the guests that I have on the show? Or
less so about the guests and more so about the conversations?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Look at you. I think, so a couple things. Like I said about being, like, I think of myself as kind of like a light switch person that, like I said, like the top of the light switch, I'm either totally obsessed and like turned on, or like, meh, don't care. And while there can be positives of that, the negative is that I'm really bad at faking it. Like it's virtually impossible for me to do something that I don't want to do. Not in the way of like, I'm not in the mood to run and I'm going to go run anyway. I don't mean like whether you're in the mood to do it or not, but if I'm like genuinely not interested in something, it's going to show, right? So I have had either, for example, like suggestions or people who have wanted to be on the show that maybe they have like a really big audience and it would be like a good guest to land or whatever. But I don't find myself genuinely curious about what it is that they are doing in the world. Nothing against them, but like I don't feel that. And so I'll say no, because I can't fake, right? Like it's a 2-hour conversation is really long if I'm like, I need to be genuinely interested. And the reason you mentioned one of my favorite questions to ask, and this isn't just in the podcast, but just in life in general, is to ask someone like, what are you totally obsessed with right now? Because I think, it's for me, such a better indication of who someone is at any given point than the like, well, what do you do question. Like I kind of try to stay away from that, especially because it's not a fun question for a lot of people that are just, they have a job, they do it for money. Like it's not everyone wants to be kind of identified by what they do for money, right? And so this idea of like, what are you obsessed with? It's interesting because people answer the question, they like light up. Like people want to talk about, oh my God, I just read this book, or I'm taking this kickboxing class, and like sometimes the answers are completely like not what I would expect, right? Someone's like, I'm so into like reupholstering furniture. I'm like, and for me, I couldn't care less about reupholstering furniture, for example. So it's not that I need to be interested in the thing that they're interested in. I'm interested in and like attracted to obsession and passion in general. So I'm like, all right, tell me everything about reupholstering furniture, right? Like there's something I feel like that's really compelling about someone's genuine enthusiasm. And I feel like it's a really cool way to learn from people, especially if they're into stuff that's different from you, right? So it's a kind of a combination, like how those conversations unfold. Like I'm always looking for, like tell me, don't give me your like elevator pitch for your job, right? Like what are you totally into? Like what is the thing that you're like lying in bed at night and you can't fall asleep because you're thinking about, X, Y, or Z, right? Like rescuing kittens or, cooking the best, baking the best chocolate cake ever, whatever it is that gets people like super excited. And I think it's also an interesting question because that changes over time, right? Like what we're super obsessed with now might be and probably will be different than what we're super obsessed with in 6 months. So I feel like it's a cool way to kind of, give people permission to change and to kind of watch like interests kind of come and go.
And going for a circle is probably a better way to figure out what brings you joy in a way that it's not construed as not like, oh, this is the right answer that I have to give you, but it's like, what are you excited about? Or what are you obsessed over? It's like, open the floodgates. Yeah.
And it's funny looking at kind of, or like the parallel that I set up of joy versus fun, the obsession question tends to be the fun stuff, right? Like what people think of, it's kind of like obsession or guilty pleasure or the thing that they like, oh my God, I can't stop reading the Hunger Games or, whatever it is. And so I feel like that's an interesting question. And the other question that's really interesting to me is not necessarily around the idea of goals, but like, what are you building? What are you working toward? Because I think that often is the other side of that same coin where, if you ask someone what they're obsessed with, they might say, like I said, like, oh, this TV show that they have like been binge watching for 3 days and like haven't slept and showered because all they can do is watch this show. Right. Which like, I totally understand how that goes. But then like, what are you working toward? What are you building? I think those are two I find really interesting questions to ask people.
And do you do this every day or is that a more structured thing?
What, you mean asking people these questions?
Yeah. Do you go to a party and ask, what are you obsessed over?
I know, right? Like, does anyone want to invite me to their party? No, I asked, obviously, like having a podcast as a part-time job where you're basically a professional question asker, right? Like it's helpful to have the conversations tend to take like, those routes, but no, but it is like when you're meeting someone for the first time or like having a coffee date or having whatever, like some version of that will usually come out. Like, what are you excited about? What are you working on? I think it is a good way to get to know someone. So it's not like every day because I'm not necessarily talking to someone new every day, but they definitely, I think they're good questions. I think that you can learn a lot about someone from both of those.
So my business name is also This Makes Me Happy. It's like registered. So my debit card, my credit card say This Makes Me Happy. So, or my business card, everything. So when I'm giving out my business cards or even when I'm paying, if I go to the teller at the bank, they just smile and they just, I don't even have to ask the question. It's already there. It just sparks the most random conversations. And I found that in a way similar to what you're saying, what you're obsessed over is what's fun and what you're building is what's joy. To me, just asking, what makes you happy isn't in a way what's important to you. So to me, it's easier because I don't even have to talk about it. It's just in my business card or my debit card or, I'm paying for
awesome.
I'm paying for groceries. And they're like, oh, what does this makes me happy? It's like, and then we just start chatting like, what makes you happy? It just happens.
Yeah. And I think, again, like I said at the top, that like, it's such a simple question. And I feel like this idea of happiness like gets thrown around a lot, but I think there is a lot of power in just taking time. It doesn't necessarily have to be every day, but every couple months or however people do their kind of review and reflection, knowing what the current answers are to any version of I think the questions we're asking all kind of circle around the same thing, right? Like you said, like what's important to you? Like, what do you value? What do you want more of in your life? Like it's all kind of the same thing. And periods of time in my life, if I look back, I wouldn't have been able to answer those questions. And like that to me is concerning. Like there was a time when I had gone too far into the kind of self-discipline, like self-help. At this point, I feel like I'm a recovering self-help addict, but going too far down that rabbit hole. And I stopped one day and what happened? I think I had like a couple of days off and someone said, oh, like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? That's fun or something. And I had no answer. And I started thinking, what do I find fun? And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I think at the time I was 29, 30. I'm like, oh, I don't know what I find fun. That's not acceptable to me, right? So being able to sit down and say, okay, what do I actually enjoy doing? Like things that little kids know instinctively, right? Like they know what they want to play or what they want to do. And I think we lose some of that sometimes as adults. Like we have responsibilities and everything has to, there were years where I didn't let myself read fiction because I felt like it was a waste of time. Anything that I was reading had to be like business related or self-help or like it had to somehow have a purpose. And it was like a real like intentional thing for me to decide to start reading fiction again and start reading trashy fiction and just like things that are just for fun. And so I feel like checking in with yourself is super important, like to know at any given time what makes you happy, and like to make sure you're doing that.
So, it's interesting you mentioned your reading list because you go on it right now. It's, you have it published on your website. And by the way, is that reading list from 2016 all books you've read in 2016?
So the way that the bookshelf works on my site, because people know that I read a lot, I was getting questions like, what should I read or book recommendations or this all the time. And I feel like when you're getting the same question over and over, it's up to you to make some kind of a resource, right? So you don't have to answer the same email every single day. So the first part of the list is basically my kind of all-time favorite books by genre of book that I tend to read, right? So like sports memoirs or vegan cookbooks or erotica or whatever. So those are kind of my favorites. And then this year, 2016, for the first time, I decided to keep a list of every book that I read this year, just for me. Like I thought that it would be kind of fun to have and maybe would be fun for other people too. So yeah, under that, I have the list of the books I read this year. I haven't updated it on winter break. So I think there's 4 or 5 more books that I have to add. Yeah, it's a really huge list. I read a lot, but it's funny. Like if you look at that list, I mean, and once it becomes 2017, that list will come down. So I don't know if it'll be up when people listen to this, but you can see completely what I mean about the oscillating obsessions. Like there are the random one-off books, but like basically the first, there's a huge chunk of memoirs about long distance hiking, right? Like people who hiked the PCT, the AT, like that's clearly what I was obsessed with because I was, planning my own hike. So it's like all these books about that. And then there's a big section of books that are memoirs from people in the food industry, right? Like cooks and restaurant that and that was when I was making the decision to go back to culinary school. And then there's always a lot of erotica, but it's funny. You can like track the things that I've been obsessed with over a year based on like, oh, she read every book about this topic, but it's been fun for me to look back and be able to see that, like to say, oh, this is what I was obsessed with in February, right? Or this is what I was obsessed with in April or whatever. So yeah, it's been fun to have a public reading list.
I was just impressed. I was going over it and just the sheer volume of how many books you've read this year. I'm a slow reader.
It's like 120, I think. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I read maybe 5 books this year, not counting like the teaching books and all the stuff I had to read. But I guess where I want to get at with the reading part is, you said before you wouldn't even allow yourself to read nonfiction, and now you're reading it a lot. And do you feel in other aspects of your life, running, how do you feel different now that you're allowing yourself to do all this stuff that before you couldn't even identify?
Yeah. So the first thing, right, like it seems like a small thing to go from only reading nonfiction to like incorporating more fiction, and maybe it is on the surface a small thing, but to me, it's really indicative of kind of letting myself be fully who I am and not trying to fit into like one specific box. Like, when I kind of started, my own business has gone through a lot of different iterations of things that I've done. But when I started working for myself, I had a very rigid idea of what I thought that had to look like what it meant to be an entrepreneur, what it meant to work for yourself online, do any of these things. And a lot of that comes from just, what we see, right? Like you get on the list of here's the 10 things you have to do to whatever, it's really easy to internalize what other people say the rules are for anything. Whether that's running or business or whatever. And so for me, for a long time, like I felt really rigid, like I had to be doing something a specific way, or I had to be posting certain things on social media that like fit into this, box. Or if I was going to spend time reading, it had to be something that was going to be like, quote, beneficial, right? It had to like earn me some kind of reward. And like that became really exhausting and started to feel inauthentic because I'm just kind of playing a role that I think that I should play versus it's been like to answer your question, like it feels really liberating to allow all of the things that I'm interested in to find a place in my life, whether that's a tiny place, right? Or a large place, and be able to, accept that we're not one dimensional, right? Like I can take my business podcasting really seriously and also spend 6 hours on a Sunday afternoon, like reading trashy books, right? Like those things don't necessarily, like they can both be true. And I think before I was looking at like, well, if I'm going to be a serious runner, then that means X, Y, or Z, right? That means that I only eat super healthy and I only do that. And I only, like you said, we set all these rules for ourselves. I think of like what we think it means to inhabit a certain identity. And we forget that the only thing that needs to be true for me to say that I'm a runner is for me to run. Like that can happen in the morning. It can happen in the evening. It can happen as much or as little as I want. I can eat whatever I want. Like I can do, like it's, you buy Runner's World and they like portray, okay, well, you have to have this body and you have to wear these clothes. Like, no, none of that's actually true. So I know it's been like a process of allowing what's true for me to be true without judgment. Like I mentioned that before, I'm really interested in any situation, especially with myself, getting to the heart of what's true without judgment. Like just, oh, it's true that I enjoy reading trashy books and I enjoy reading biographies of like some of the most successful people ever. Okay, that doesn't have to conflict. I enjoy being really serious about running and really silly about other things. And just, I don't know, just kind of like letting yourself have all of the parts of you. And also one of the big lessons that I've learned, I mean, obviously I kind of mentioned lightly the quitting drinking, starting running. Like I have like fundamentally changed my life in the last 6 years in a lot of different ways, which has given me not just an appreciation for the process of change, but also the necessity to allow ourselves to change. I think it's really easy to get stuck in a box, especially the more public we are with social media, or if we do something publicly, right? You become known as, I'm Nicole, the runner. I'm, whatever, like I'm Susie, the designer, or the whatever, or the homemaker, and like we kind of get boxed into these roles that then when we want to change, because I think that's just like the nature of being human is change, that we have a hard time letting ourselves do that. So a lot of it for me has been just like liberating to let myself change, like to say, hey, I'm totally obsessed with whatever this thing is now, but that might not be the case in a year or 2 years or whatever. And what if that's fine? Like, what if we just not only give ourselves, but give each other permission to change? I think that there's something really meaningful in that.
And I think there's something special about you don't just allow yourself to change, but you make it a big point. Like your conversation on your podcast you talk a lot about quitting drinking. You talk a lot about starting to run. You talk a lot about, but then you also talk with, erotica experts, and you talk about, so you're making it a very public statement without necessarily making a statement. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, that was kind of part of the evolution for me is, I hate to think of like, well, like what is my brand or whatever. I don't know, like some of that feels a little like icky to me, although you can't get away from the fact that if you do something publicly, like you have a brand, right? So that you're either going to kind of make it yourself or other people are going to make it for you. And it was kind of a conscious choice for me to make a big part of my brand this idea of change, because that was one of the problems that I had of, I would want to do something for a year or two, be really excited about it, and then want to move on. I blogged for 8 years. I mean, at this point, I've been sharing personal content of some kind on the internet for almost a decade, which is a really long time. Like I've spent almost my entire adult life on the internet. And I blogged for 8 years and I got to the point where it just didn't feel good anymore. And so I quit and I deleted my entire blog. And some people just like couldn't believe that was like, what are you doing? Like how you've built up all this, I don't know, whatever, traffic, readership, different things, but like it didn't feel good to me anymore. So, all right, that's over. Next thing, right? And I had, an online coaching business and I did that for 3 years and then that no longer felt good. So, okay, that's out. And like, I don't know, I had to give myself permission to just allow myself to change and to just trust that people would eventually see that whatever I'm working on, while I'm working on it, I'm super into it, I'm super committed to it, and that at any point, if it no longer is a good fit, I'll let it go, because the last thing I want is to do something like out of obligation and then wind up resenting it. And I think that comes through in the work. Like there are bloggers or writers or podcasters or just creators of different types that I've followed, and you can, as a member of the audience, you can kind of sense when they're not in it anymore, right? Like when they're phoning it in or when they feel resentful of having to do it, or like no one wants that. Like no one wants to consume that content. But it's like easy to feel like, well, I started this thing, so now I have to do this thing forever. And I don't know. I don't believe that. I think there's a lot of freedom in just try it. And if you enjoy it, do it until you don't want to do it anymore. And then I don't know, like especially when it comes to creative projects and stuff, that the last thing that I would want would be to be creating something that I resented that other people could pick up on, or, so I think, yeah, that's been like a big part of my thing, is accepting that I'm going to do something and I'm going to be totally obsessed with it while I'm doing it. And then when I don't want to do it anymore, then I'm going to try to gracefully wrap it up and make room for what's next.
The way the honesty with which you're talking right now is the same honesty you put in your podcast, and I think it's very inspiring. Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about inspiring others to be more honest, or is that just not even a thought?
I don't know if I would say that I think about inspiring people. There's something about that also feels icky to me, because I think that the word inspiring or inspiration is kind of thrown around too much, especially these days on the internet. Because I think that inspiration is surface level unless you do anything with it, right? Like you can read some incredible story or like hear something and, oh, that's so inspiring. That person's so inspiring. but okay, like, are you just like watching that TED talk and then not doing anything with your life? Right. Like, I'm not interested in that. Like, it doesn't make me feel good for someone to say, oh, like Nicole's inspiring or whatever. Like, the thing that really means something to me, I got an email, and this is like one of a series, like a lot of emails that I've gotten over the years, which I'm, grateful for everyone. This woman who, sent me, it was essentially like kind of an end of year thank you note. And she kind of detailed the changes, like the specific kind of action steps and changes that she's made in her life just through, years of consumption of my work. And that was like the most meaningful thing that I could receive, because it wasn't just someone saying nice words like, oh my God, you're inspirational, right? Like, that doesn't really mean anything to me, but to see like an example of someone, whether I had a small role in it, like, that's amazing, but like actually making, right, like actionable change in their own lives and like turning around and doing something with it, like that's incredible, and something that, I'm always honored to have happen. In terms of, wanting to maybe inspire or encourage people to have more honest conversations, I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, that's something that I value, and it's, both in my personal life and in my, I guess, creative professional life, has brought so much to me, just, continuing to hold that standard of having honest conversations, even if they're messy, even if they're hard, even if it's easier not to. That's something that I really believe in. So if someone, right, like gets that from me and winds up having more of that, yeah, that's awesome. Like, I'm all about the ripple effect, but it goes both ways. Like, when I have these conversations with people, they bring up things that then I turn around and do in my own life. Like, the nice thing about a conversation is that there's two sides of it. Like, both people are learning and growing from each other. And I think that there's a lot of power in that.
And I love that. What did you say? We were talking before we started recording how sometimes we have people on our show and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe we talked to this person. But then also we talk about that sometimes the biggest impact comes from people that are not that well known. But the idea that now that you're mentioning the impact that you get from those conversations, how it's a two-way thing, that we gain so much just talking to other people, not just putting stuff out there, that I think is very special. I want to take a page from your book and bounce two questions to you that we talked about earlier, but that you do. I want to know what you're building, and I want to know what you're totally obsessed with.
All right, let's do it. It's funny that those are my favorite questions, and like, I don't have ready answers to them. What am I totally obsessed with? Okay, I'm totally obsessed with making the best ever cinnamon buns. That has become, like, since I've gone back to pastry school, it's actually not something that we've done in class yet, but I've started to think about what are the couple of desserts or, pastries, bakes, whatever, that make me so happy when I eat them, right? Or when I eat like incredible versions of them that I want to be able to recreate. And there's just something that's so awesome about like a giant, amazing, warm cinnamon bun, like with cream cheese frosting, just like so good, right? That I want to be able to make cinnamon buns that make people's mouths explode with delight and excitement. So I am currently obsessed with experimenting with cinnamon bun recipes. So,
and I'm sure Paul, your husband, is very happy about it.
And well, it's funny. So outside of going to pastry school, we're, mostly vegan, right? I mean, not technically because, we've always eaten honey and that kind of thing. But, other than that, really like totally plant-based diet. And that was a huge for me to decide to go back to a traditional culinary school, to accept that, this was the first time that I was going to be working with and eating, like eggs and butter and milk in like maybe 5 years. So that was definitely a big change. And so Paul actually he still doesn't eat that stuff. So it's funny, like when I'm doing experimental baking for school as opposed to vegan baking, I have to call other people to come over and be my taste testers. So it's probably torture for him that he's like, these things smell so good, but I'm choosing not to eat them. So I will also master vegan cinnamon buns, I guess. That's I promise him that will also happen. So yeah, I am obsessed with making delicious cinnamon buns. I'm into it.
And what are you building?
What am I building? This, again, at the time of this recording, right? Like right at the end of the year, is an interesting, I'm super nerdy for like end of year reflection and goal setting and like vision boarding and what do I want the next year to be? Like it's something else I'm obsessed with. Like I could do that all day long, right? Like if every conversation anyone wanted to have for the next 6 days was like dreams, goals, and plans for 2017, like give me it. Like I will do it all day. So that's a question that I'm asking in terms of what I want to kind of build for myself, because this is the first time that my year has been relatively set in terms of like my big projects, right? Like I know that a huge portion of my year is going to be working on, building a culinary education, right? Like being in school essentially full time, and then working on building like the best podcast that I can. So the fact that the majority of my time is already spoken for, I'm kind of asking myself, what am I building on a more deeply personal way? And let me see if I can explain this, because I'm still just kind of working through it myself personally. You're the first person that I've talked about this with. So for as much as running gives me a sense of discipline, and I really value kind of hard work and commitment, one of my weaknesses is that I tend to kind of resist and rebel against and break the rules that I set for myself. Again, like going back to the meditation thing, it's something that I've wanted to do and tried for such a long time, and always find like excuses and reasons and like little rebellions not to do it. Like as soon as I say, this is what I'm going to do, there's a part of me that wants to be like a 5-year-old and throw a tantrum of like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. Right. Like, and I don't really know what that's about, other than maybe it's just human nature. So what I think the question that I asked myself in reflection this year is, which 1 to 5 small, like daily or regular changes, like if they happened consistently over the course of the year, would most dramatically change my life? Like not the big, like I'm going to go on a month-long, whatever, like not like just like the actual small things that if I were to do them, that the act of doing them every day or regularly would kind of stack up to, 365 days from now, a really meaningful life change. And so in answering that question, like one of the things that became really clear to me that I want to build, this is a long circuitous answer to your question, but that I want to build is, like, it's funny. I'm when I was writing it down in my like planner, my journal, whatever, the phrase that really is speaking to me is church of the daily schedule, that like developing like a true devotion to the like schedules that I'm setting for myself, like as opposed to looking at something that I'm rebelling against or something like that. This idea of like church of the daily schedule, like finding joy in full devotion to that which I have thoughtfully pre-planned, like trusting my past self that like when I decided that I was going to be waking up at 5:30 and doing meditation, like just like fully devoting to that. And so I would really like to build like a better relationship with just this idea of a daily schedule, and maybe not so regimented that there isn't room for fun or anything, but I would really like to build a different relationship with kind of these like small daily things that it's easy to push off, but that if I keep doing them will have a big impact. So I don't know if that was like too jumbled, because I'm still just figuring it out myself, but that's what I would like to build, or that's what I'm working on building.
But that's the mess of being human, that you think of things and they figure them out.
Right. That it's not, I always say like, I have no answers. I have no, like, but that's, my most honest thing is that I want to build, like a real, it's like, I want to change my mindset when it comes to this kind of stuff, to not look at, my daily schedule as like, oh, just a to-do list that I have to check off to get to the fun stuff, but to really build like a devoted relationship where like the joy is in the process, right? Like falling in love with the grind and like really kind of leaning into these small things and like seeing them as like little sacred moments.
All right, Nicole, let's jump to the rapid fire section. I have a few quick questions about what makes you happy. I just want your gut reaction. And I was laughing a little bit when you said that you don't have answers to your questions, because the same happens to me. If someone asked me these questions, I wouldn't know what to answer, but I have fun asking them. So if you're ready, I will shoot.
I am ready. Yeah.
All right. Who makes you happy?
My cats. Does that count? Is that a who?
Yeah.
Playing with my kitties, snuggling with my kitties. That makes me happy. I probably should say my husband. I love him. He makes me happy too. But there's just something that's like so joyful about, I don't know, the like innocence of little animals, and just, I love my cats. They make me happy.
Is there a movie or a song that makes you happy?
I'm not a big music person, which sounds weird. I don't know. I'm not super into music. A movie that makes me happy. Well, top of mind since we're coming out of the holiday season is Love Actually. It's one of two movies that I watch every year around Halloween. I watch Hocus Pocus. That makes me enormously happy. It's like the best movie ever. And every holiday season, I usually watch Love Actually. So both of those make me happy.
Who is the happiest person you can think of?
The happiest person I can think of. It's funny. I've actually been thinking about her a lot. My friend Zoe, who I met, a couple years ago when I moved here to Bend, Oregon. She is probably the happiest person I've ever met in my life. And more than anyone that I know, she prioritizes fun and is always doing like cool things and is out there and, spends very little time online. I mean, she uses social media lightly, but like just doesn't seem to get wrapped up in like a lot of the nonsense and the BS that I can find myself easily getting wrapped up in. She's the kind of person who will come over, and she'll just knock on the door without calling first, without texting first, like random 7:30 on like a Tuesday night. And she's like, I was in the area, let's hang out. And like, it's something that people don't do, right? It's like when you're a little kid and you go to someone's house, like, oh, like, can Sarah come out and play? Right? Like it's that kind of thing. And so yeah, that's something else I'm thinking about for next year is being more like Zoe, because I think that's a lovely quality.
What is the first happy moment you can remember?
Like in my life?
In your life, yes.
Oh, geez. What's the first happy moment I can remember? It's funny. This is, I guess, kind of like a non-answer, but that I feel like early memories are faulty because like I've seen so many photos and like home videos of when I was small that I don't know what I actually remember versus like what I think I remember because I've seen video of it. Right. So like one of the first things that came to mind, one of my early birthdays, I mean, it might have been my third birthday. My parents threw this party for me in the backyard and Big Bird came. And that was, I was obsessed with Sesame Street, which was, I think, a lot of kids of the 80s were. And they, hired someone, I guess, who like had a Big Bird costume, whatever those things work. And Big Bird came and it was just like, you look at the like photos and videos. It's like meeting the Queen and the president and like your favorites. Like it was, I like couldn't believe that this had happened to me because you think it's the real Big Bird, right? Like at that, you don't understand that this is like some dude who like works at the costume store or whatever. And I was really, just like floored that I was special enough that Big Bird had come to my party and was going to like eat goldfish crackers with me. And like, it was just, so I guess I'm going to say that.
And that's, I always say that's like my favorite question to ask because you get the most random answers and yeah. I can't help but smile. I'm so happy we finally got to chat. You got so much going on in your world. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to? Where can we find you? A little bit about your podcast?
Sure. I feel like we talked about that a little bit, but NicoleAntoinette.com. That's basically where you can find me. And I'm not, for the first time, not doing like a ton of different stuff online. Like basically what I'm doing is the podcast. And so if you're into honest conversations with a huge range of people, check it out. Obviously the conversations are totally different versus, if I'm talking to a long distance hiker versus a first time mom versus, there's kind of something for everyone. So that's the podcast, NicoleAntoinette.com. It's podcast is called Real Talk Radio. And then you can also find me, links to Instagram and stuff are all on there, but that's basically just like pictures of cats and mountains and desserts. So if those things are of interest to you. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to. I will be back in school soon. So desserts and honest conversations and running and trying to balance joy and fun. That's really it.
Love it. And you said your next season comes out in February and this will come out in February. So probably around the same time people can go over and listen to a new season.
Yeah, perfect. I release an entire 8-episode season on the first of the month, every other month. So yes, February 1st will be the next season, which I am recording right now. So exciting.
Right. Can't wait to hear it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Nicole, for sharing what makes you happy. And thanks everyone for listening. A special thanks to Jason Zappolo for editing this episode, Orla Margulies for help with social media, and Rocio Castañeda for ongoing support. Please go to thehappypodcast.com for this and past episodes and for more information about this project, and visit us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at The Happy Podcast, or on YouTube at youtube.com/thehappypodcast. Please sign up through iTunes to get the latest episode on your device, and please leave us a 5-star review so that others can find us. Thank you, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.